The lights went dark because I flipped the switch. Not HR. Not the maintenance team.
Me.
After 2 decades at Nexus Dynamics, every circuit running through that glass and steel building in the Bay Area carried echoes of decisions I'd made long before the venture capital poured in. I knew exactly which breaker would kill the overheads in the main corridor without tripping the servers. When Ryan Kessler waved me toward the exit with that polished, boardroom-ready smile, I didn't argue. I simply reached behind the access panel I'd installed myself years earlier and cut the power in a smooth cascade. The floor plunged into shadow like the final curtain on a stage no one had bothered to applaud. Ryan thought that was the end of it. He had no idea how wrong he was. They called me the architect in the early days, though mostly behind my back. The guy still writing clean code while everyone else chased trends. I never chased titles or corner offices. I sat toward the back in meetings, kept my desk tidy with color-coded notebooks, and brought lunch in the same insulated bag I'd used since the company was just a handful of engineers sharing ramen in a rented warehouse. My place felt etched in stone after the Series B round, quiet, reliable, easy to overlook. But deep down, I had already begun to detach. The backbone of Nexus Dynamics, the logistics orchestration engine that powered their $500 million valuation, was built on modular layers I sketched out in my spare bedroom back when the founders were still pitching to friends and family. Those early modules were filed under a consulting entity I created for protection, Caldwell Innovations LLC. Still active in Ohio. Still filing its modest taxes. Still holding the original sandbox licenses that the entire platform depended on for core functions like dynamic routing, predictive analytics, and secure inventory syncing. When the company exploded in growth, the contracts ballooned, the jargon thickened, and Ryan started throwing around terms like cloud-native velocity in investor decks. No one revisited the original intellectual property clauses. The paperwork felt ancient, handled. Except it wasn't. I was never asked to sign the transfer documents that would have reassigned full rights. I didn't volunteer. The office smelled faintly of overbrewed coffee from the break room machines the day they handed me the envelope. Ryan called it a strategic realignment, efficiency optimization. He said they needed people who could move at startup speed. I smiled, thanked him for the opportunity, and left my badge on the desk exactly where it belonged. I took the elevator I'd ridden thousands of times, for 1,200 and counting, and didn't glance at the motivational murals or the employee recognition wall where my photo had long since been rotated out. By the time I reached my car in the parking lot overlooking the hills, the first quiet alerts were already firing inside the system. No one had thought to verify where the sandbox environment still resolved. The fallback authentication paths pointed to registries that had never been migrated because they weren't flashy enough to appear on updated architecture diagrams. Those registries belonged to me. That evening I sat in my modest townhouse in a quiet suburb, the one I'd paid off years ago, and let the weight settle. 20 years of being the invisible foundation. 20 years of watching newer hires leapfrog with buzzwords while I kept the servers breathing at 3 a.m. during critical migrations. I didn't feel rage exactly, just a clear, crystalline recognition that the machine they bragged about had never truly been theirs. The next morning, the all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Ryan arrived late on purpose, talking about perception management. The new marketing coordinator whispered about vibe curation while the projector lit up a glossy deck promising a leaner, smarter future. There was even a rented DJ booth in the corner, branded lights pulsing to upbeat tracks. Ryan strutted out in slim-fit chinos and a button-down with sleeves rolled just so. He quoted some motivational guru, then dropped the slide everyone feared, role streamlining. My name appeared third on the list. 20 years reduced to a bullet point behind a data scientist on maternity leave and a DevOps engineer recovering from surgery. The applause was polite, scattered, the kind that carries guilt. Ryan didn't look at me once. He simply moved to the next slide, sipping a green smoothie through a paper straw, assuring everyone that all foundational IP has been consolidated and fully transitioned. I almost smiled. Consolidated. My name hadn't even appeared correctly on half the renewal notices for the past 3 years. They had skipped footnotes. Assumed the quiet guy in the back didn't hold anything critical. But I was the vault. While they staged LinkedIn photos and influencer-style team offsites, I had quietly maintained the conditional logic that decided whether deployments even received clearance to run. I took the envelope, walked the main hallway one last time, paused at the wall panel near the old QA room, and flipped the sequence that dropped the corridor lights one by one like falling dominoes. They had never updated that board. It predated the big merger push. Existed outside the asset maps Ryan reviewed. Outside, the air carried the scent of eucalyptus from the over-budget landscaping meant to impress visitors. As I drove away, I felt the subtle shift begin beneath their feet. When you remove a load-bearing beam without checking the foundation, you'd better hope nothing important was resting on it. I was that beam. My desk had been cleared in under 15 minutes, not because I hurried, but because I had never brought more than I was willing to carry. A few notebooks, a chipped mug, a rubber duck flash drive that held local copies of the original models. I left the badge on the server rack beside the handwritten note I'd taped there years ago. Never unplug port 42. No one knew who wrote it. I had. Twice. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not from anxiety, but from the steady drum of anticipation. At 7:30, the next morning I submitted a single routine notice of active licensing status renewal under Caldwell Innovations LLC, the same entity, same PO, box in Dayton, same signature. The name had never been purged from the registry because it was considered pre-pivot clutter. They thought I was just another W-2 employee clinging to the past. In truth, I had started as a contractor, and the core modules powering their inventory stack, routing engine, and failure prediction scripts had been provisioned under that sandbox license. The clause was buried, but binding. They never audited the version control history after the acquisition. Everyone was too busy chasing scalability narratives. I opened my personal terminal, the one never connected to their VPN, and logged into an admin console so old it still used tabbed interfaces. 3 authentications later, I had root access. The front end had been polished with modern frameworks and investor-friendly dashboards, but the pipes underneath still hummed with my original architecture. On the status screen, the sandbox license heartbeat pulsed steadily. Active. Last verified minutes ago. They had never disconnected it. I didn't touch anything. Not yet. I simply closed the session and watched a garbage truck rumble past my window. They believed I had vanished quietly, like an obsolete patch. But I was still there, unplugged, yet perfectly positioned to decide what happened next. Tuesday morning at 9:12 a.m. Ryan was striding through the product floor like a coach before the big game, clapping shoulders and promising investors they were about to go airborne. A major logistics update was scheduled, new routing algorithms, refreshed UI layers, a dash of machine learning to impress the board. He had sold it hard in the previous demo, complete with flashy animations showing seamless performance. The push began. Then everything stalled. No catastrophic crash, just silent red flags. Core modules hung in pending validation. APIs responded, but many functions returned authorization errors. The system wasn't broken, it was locked behind doors no one held keys for. A junior engineer named Priya, fresh out of Stanford, spotted the anomaly in the audit logs first, a certificate string on heartbeat pings that resolved to a third-party license not owned by Nexus Dynamics. She escalated it. Within minutes, the screenshot hit the DevOps channel. Certificate Authority, Caldwell Innovations LLC. Most employees had never heard the name. Older engineers froze.
Legal got involved.
Compliance spiraled. No one could answer the obvious questions. Who approved this dependency chain? Ryan was pulled from a leadership sink and stormed into the war room. Tie Askew. Shirt untucked for that relatable look. His face flushed the moment the licensing diagram appeared. Tell me this is some kind of test, he snapped. We own the architecture. I said it was wrapped up. The CTO, who had joined only 8 months earlier, swallowed hard. The original dev environment license is tied to a pre-acquisition LLC. Caldwell Innovations. It looks like Ethan's. Ryan spat the name like it left a bad taste.
He's gone.
He doesn't have access. Compliance corrected him quietly. He doesn't need access. Ownership was never relinquished. The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind that follows the realization you've been living beside a landmine mistaken for furniture. A second error pinged. Container deployment rejected due to encryption mismatch. Nothing had been sabotaged. Everything was intact, yet frozen. The update window closed. Client support lines began lighting up. Sales scrambled for answers. Engineering spiraled into finger-pointing. The truth settled like fog. The entire platform they had built their future upon was running on licenses they did not fully control. And the man they had erased from the org chart now held the master keys. My phone started buzzing around 8:40 a.m. By 9:15, I had buried it under a pillow. By 10, it was powered off. I knew the script. They would panic, demand explanations, offer apologies wrapped in corporate language. When I finally turned it back on, the screen flooded with notifications, 180 missed calls, numbers from unfamiliar area codes. A DC law firm they'd used during the last funding round. One block number I suspected belonged to Ryan. 3 calls spaced exactly 20 minutes apart came from Marcus Vale himself. Marcus, the founder who had stepped back to write a book on founder psychology, hadn't been seen regularly at HQ for over a year. His arrival was legendary in the company's subreddit. Blurry photos showed him storming through the lobby in his signature blazer. 2 espresso shots in hand, face like thunder. He bypassed reception, entered the boardroom, and slammed his laptop down. Why the hell can't we push a simple patch? Legal stammered about legacy architecture. Marcus pulled up an archived folder he had kept personally out of old paranoia. Inside lay the original partnership terms. Plain as day, primary architecture modules licensed non-exclusively under Caldwell Innovations LLC unless explicitly reassigned during acquisition. My notarized signature sat there, never revoked, never overwritten. During the transition audit, I had flagged the issue. Ryan had dismissed it as contractual lint and told legal to drop it from review. Now the oversight had teeth. Ryan tried shifting blame, claimed no one had informed him of the risk. Marcus cut him off with one sentence. You fired the guy who built the engine and never checked if he still held the keys. The words landed like a verdict. Back at home, I folded laundry, watched steam rise from fresh coffee, and felt 2 decades of tension finally begin to uncoil. I hadn't been vengeful. I had simply refused to hand over what was mine without proper process. The system they boasted about couldn't even complete a basic deployment without my license heartbeat. Marcus Vale, the untouchable founder, now stood in the boardroom confronting a clause everyone had ignored. The call came at 12:04 p.m. Marcus's name lit the screen. I let it ring twice, then answered. Ethan, he said, skipping pleasantries. Why is our core platform still tied to your LLC? I answered calmly. Because you never signed the overwrite paperwork. Ryan said it wasn't worth legal time. That was 3 years ago. Silence stretched. I could hear his controlled breathing, the inhale of a man realizing the ground had shifted. What do you want? I don't want chaos. But your system stays locked until the modules are properly licensed. Temporarily. Of course. I'm not unreasonable. He didn't threaten litigation. He knew the position. I emailed a draft agreement minutes later. Narrow scope. Temporary term. Non-transferable. With built-in revocation triggers. In the fine print, advisory input on future decisions affecting the license modules and a modest usage-based royalty backdated to Ryan's tenure start. I sought acknowledgement, not destruction. By 1:20 p.m., an emergency board session convened. Marcus sat at the head, original filings beside him. Ryan rambled about honest mistakes and miscommunication. Marcus never glanced his way. Instead, he read aloud from a 3-year-old email chain where I had flagged the contract overwrite as high importance. Ryan's reply, not urgent. We'll sunset it after rebrand. Marcus looked up. Guess we didn't move fast enough. They voted 7-2 in favor of the temporary agreement. Ryan abstained, face pale. As signatures went through, Marcus met my eyes on the video feed. You waited. I built it, I replied. You don't leave the keys under the mat for people who never read the blueprint. The call ended. I sat in the quiet of my kitchen and let the stillness sink in. There's a difference between respect and remembrance. Today I had both. The boardroom felt colder than usual, glass walls, steel accents, air conditioning set too low. Ryan stood at the center trying to project control, but sweat darkened his shirt. His voice cracked when he called the licensing issue a minor legacy oversight. No one bought it. Marcus sat stone-faced, tapping a manila folder.
No slides.
No theatrics, just paper and the quiet weight of a platform worth hundreds of millions running on licenses they didn't own. He unfolded the internal memo and read slowly, the flag I had raised. The dismissal that followed. Ryan tried to interject about phasing out old architecture, but the room had already turned. The CFO scanned the licensing summary I provided, eyes lingering on every revocable clause. Marcus dropped the options on the table: permanent royalty-based licensing, an advisory seat with veto power over architectural changes, or a full re-architecture at Nexus's expense. No fourth option existed. After tense discussion, Marcus signed the temporary agreement. Power shifted not with drama, but with the scratch of a pen across paper that should never have been necessary. Marcus turned to Ryan quietly. You didn't just lose time. You lost ownership. The room emptied. Ryan remained standing alone in the middle of a building he once believed he commanded. By Thursday, Ryan was gone. No announcement. No farewell post, just a terse line in the internal digest. Ryan Kessler has chosen to pursue new opportunities. Classic corporate speak for swift removal. Investors grew uneasy. The licensing scare had already affected client renewals. One major partner delayed a 6-figure deal pending proof of ownership. I had no interest in returning to the office. Marcus called personally. Voice steadier now. He offered stability, continuity, optics. I declined. I wasn't chasing a title. I simply wanted the system I built treated with the respect it deserved. Instead, I provided a 6-month disengagement roadmap, sequenced module deprecations, clean handoffs. Every step documented like a careful relay. My terms, usage-based royalties scaled to volume, far exceeding my former salary, without the meetings, Slack noise, or performance reviews from people half my age lecturing me on dynamism. For the first time in 20 years, I had real terms, my terms. Somewhere during the transition, the new CTO, Lena Park, sent a private message. Sharp. No nonsense. The kind of engineer who reads every line of code. Not official. But would you consider mentoring on architecture strategy? You built something truly resilient. I want to understand the spine, not just the surface. I stared at the message a long time. I could have ignored it or demanded more. Instead, I replied, sure. But my way, no jargon.
No Dex.
We start with why the system breathes the way it does. The typing indicator appeared, then vanished. That was enough. Later that week, I updated the dashboard for my sunroom. The chart ran smooth now, no flags. Just controlled transition. Peace came not from victory, but from finally being seen. I had let silence speak louder than any applause. Weeks passed in quiet rhythm. I moved north to a cabin tucked into the pines 2 hours from the nearest reliable cell signal.
No neighbors.
No urgent pings, just the scent of pine and the occasional bold squirrel. I set up a simple workspace, second-hand desk, custom-built tower, single monitor, bandwidth enough for logs but not enough for anyone's pitch deck. At 6:01 a.m., I logged into the console. The old gray-blue interface greeted me like an old friend, the same one Ryan had once mocked as aesthetic poison. One by one the modules released cleanly. Inventory core, route logic, real-time alerts, heartbeat pings. Each disconnection felt like turning off porch lights after guests had left, not failure, but chosen closure. At the bottom sat one last hidden folder labeled Ryan Override Fix. Years ago, I had written a patch to correct a recursion flaw Ryan insisted was imaginary. His attempted fix caused a memory leak that cost 6 hours of uptime during a key client onboarding. I never deployed my correction. I simply kept it, quiet leverage, labeled exactly as deserved. I archived it, encrypted the final timestamp, and locked the key in cold storage. Then I logged out. The screen faded to black. For the first time in decades, nothing waited for me, no alerts.
No obligations.
Just stillness. Marcus's follow-up email arrived days later, subject line, advisory seat terms. He wrote there was no pressure, but they trusted my judgment more than ever. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I stepped onto the porch, let coffee go cold, and watched the sun climb over the trees. 20 years they had called me quiet, invisible, replaceable. When they finally showed me the door, I made sure it opened back onto my own terms. The wind brushed the window softly, steady and unhurried, like the system itself finally breathing free. Lena and I began our first mentoring session via encrypted call the following week.
No slides.
No corporate theater. We started at the beginning, why certain conditional logic existed, how early design choices protected against cascading failures no one else had foreseen. She listened intently. For the first time, someone wanted to understand the foundation rather than pave over it.
Client gradually stabilised.
The temporary licenses held. Royalties began arriving, modest at first, then scaling with volume in a way that made my former salary feel quaint. I didn't need the money to feel whole. I needed the acknowledgement that the work mattered. One evening I received a short note from Priya, the junior engineer who first spotted the certificate string. Thank you for building something that forced us to look closer. I'm learning more now than in any sprint. Simple words. But they landed deeper than any boardroom apology. Marcus checked in occasionally, always measured. The company survived the scare, tightened processes, and quietly began auditing legacy dependencies across the board. No press release ever mentioned the incident.
Corporate memory is selective that way.
But inside the engineering ranks, my name resurfaced in hushed conversations, not as the fired guy, but as the architect who reminded everyone that foundations matter. I never returned to the office. I didn't need to. The cabin became my new center, mornings with coffee and logs, afternoons hiking ridges where cell service vanished entirely, evenings watching the sky shift colors above the pines. The royalties provided freedom, but the real gift was space to breathe without carrying the invisible load anymore. Sometimes I opened the old console just to verify everything continued releasing smoothly. Each clean disconnection brought a strange mix of nostalgia and relief, like closing chapters in a book you wrote yourself. One afternoon, Lena asked during a session why I never fought harder while still employed. I thought about it. I wasn't invisible by accident. I chose quiet competence because the work itself was the point. When they stopped seeing that, I stopped offering it freely. She nodded slowly. Most people would have burned it all down. I didn't want destruction, I said. I wanted recognition that the machine had a heart, and I built it. The conversation lingered in my mind long after we disconnected. Recognition. Not revenge. Not domination. Just the simple truth that some contributions outlast titles.
Org charts.
And even the people who sign the paychecks.
Outside.
The wind picked up, carrying the scent of coming rain. I closed the laptop, stepped onto the porch, and let the first drops hit my face. 20 years of being the unseen foundation had ended not with explosion, but with quiet, deliberate release. The platform would continue evolving without me, and I would continue, finally, on my own terms. Months later, the transition completed without major incidents. The final modules released under the agreed sequence. Heartbeat pings went dark one by one until the old sandbox environment sat silent. Archived. Preserved but no longer active. I locked the last access keys and felt the chapter close. Marcus sent a final note acknowledging the smooth handoff. Lena continued reaching out occasionally with specific architecture questions. Each exchange reinforced that the spine of a system was now understood by those who would maintain it. I never sought public credit. The royalties continued, scaled to usage, arriving like quiet dividends from work long completed. Enough to live comfortably in the cabin, fund small upgrades to the workspace, and occasionally support open-source projects that reminded me of the early days. Clean code.
Practical solution. No hype.
One crisp autumn morning, I hiked to a ridge overlooking a valley still touched by mist. Phone off. Notebook in hand, I sat on a fallen log and wrote nothing in particular, just let thoughts settle. 20 years at Nexus had taught me that corporate memory is short,
but technical debt is patient.
Ignoring the foundation eventually extracts its price. Down in the valley, Nexus continued operating. New features shipped.
Client renewed.
Ryan's name faded from internal chatter. Marcus occasionally appeared in industry podcasts, speaking thoughtfully about respecting legacy systems. Whether he connected those words to our episode, I'll never know. But the lesson had taken root somewhere. Priya messaged once more. She had been promoted and credited part of her success to studying the original patterns I left behind. Small victories, but meaningful. I never returned to the Bay Area campus. The glass building, the branded lights, the motivational murals, they belonged to another life. My life now belonged to pine-scented mornings, unhurried code reviews for personal projects, and the freedom to say no without consequence. Sometimes late at night, the old console would call to me in memory, the tabbed interface, the steady green status lights, the quiet satisfaction of a system running exactly as designed. I didn't miss the pressure, the politics, or the feeling of being convenient to forget. I missed the purity of creation, the knowledge that every line served a purpose. But creation had new forms now. Mentoring Lena, answering occasional thoughtful questions from young engineers who found my name in commit histories, watching the royalties support a quieter, more intentional life. The wind outside the cabin carried the scent of damp earth after rain. I poured fresh coffee, opened a new notebook, and began sketching ideas, not for any company, but for myself. Clean lines, practical logic, systems designed to endure. 20 years they called me replaceable. When they finally showed me the door, I ensured the house I built remembered who laid its foundation. And in the end, the silence carried my name farther than any applause ever could. The platform runs on without me now, stable and evolving. And I walk the ridges, coffee in hand, finally unburdened, finally seen not by them, but by myself. The story closes not with triumph or tragedy, but with a lingering question each of us must face in our own careers. When the people who built the foundation are shown the door, who really owns what remains standing?